Story 1. The sound that wasn't a bird. Our first story comes from a man we'll call Ranger Miller. By the time this happened, Miller had 25 years of service in the same sprawling national park. He was a man who didn't just work in the forest. He was a part of it. He was on a routine late afternoon patrol of a trail known as the Ridgeback Loop. It was a trail he knew intimately, because he had helped cut it himself decades ago. He knew the call of every bird that nested in the canopy above. Peach could distinguish the rustle of a squirrel from that of a chipmunk. He even knew the way the wind sounded when it moved through the tall pines versus the shorter, denser firs. This was his domain, a place of profound peace and order. He could feel the familiar weight of his pack, smell the damp earth and pine needles on the air, hear the steady, rhythmic crunch of his boots on the packed dirt trail. Everything was as it should be. The sun began to dip below the ridgeline, painting the sky in soft shades of orange and purple. The day was ending. And that's when he heard it. It was faintly high-pitched, almost like a bird call he didn't recognize. But it was the pattern that felt wrong. It had a cadence, a rise and fall that felt almost conversational. He stopped walking, listened. The forest was quiet around it. He dismissed it. An odd echo, a trick of the wind. He started walking. Again, he heard it again. Closer this time. Unmistakable. It was a soft, melodic whistle. And it was mimicking the tune of a children's nursery rhyme. Pop goes the weasel. Miller froze. Every instinct in his body went on high alert. No bird whistled. The natural order of his forest had just been broken. His hand rested, almost unconsciously, on the radio clipped to his shoulder. He decided to investigate. He stepped off the manicured trail, pushing toward the sound. As soon as he did, the whistling stopped. The forest became unnervingly silent. The normal chorus of insects and birds was gone. He pushed through a thicket of ferns, his senses screaming, and then he heard a new sound. Baby is crying. It's a sound that bypasses all logic and hits you on a primal level. A child was in distress. Out here, miles from anywhere, his training took over. He unclipped his radio. Dispatch. This is Miller on the Ridgeback. I have what sounds like an infant in distress, approximately half a mile north of Marker 7. I am moving to investigate. Poor. He moved faster now, pushing through the underbrush toward the crying. But as he got closer, the crying cut off abruptly. It was replaced by a perfect imitation of his own radio. Then a whispered voice. A voice that sounded chilling, impossible, like his dispatcher, Sarah. All clear. Miller. False. Alarm. His blood ran cold. He knew with absolute certainty that Sarah had not said that. The transmission had come from the woods in front of him. Something was listening. Something was learning. And it was trying to lure him in. Heart pounding. He unholstered his sidearm. The cold metal, a shocking weight in his hand. He hadn't drawn his weapon on this trail in over a decade. He moved forward, slowly now, into a small clearing. In the center stood a massive, ancient oak tree, its branches like skeletal fingers against the twilight sky. The sounds started again, but now they came from all around him. A disorienting, impossible cacophony. He heard the nursery rhyme to his left, the baby crying from somewhere behind him, the sound of a woman weeping coming from the branches above. Then he heard the one sound that completely shattered. He heard his own voice, perfectly replicated, calling out a name, his wife's name. That's when he saw it. A flicker of movement in the dense canopy of the oak tree. It wasn't a bird or a squirrel. It was large, gaunt, and unnaturally pale. He saw its limbs bending at angles that were fundamentally wrong as it scrambled through the branches with silent speed. He couldn't make out a face, only a shape that defied nature. He raised his flashlight, his hand trembling to get a better look. The beam cut through the gloom and hit the canopy. Breath, and as it did, all the mimicked sounds converged into one, a deafening, inhuman shriek that seemed to come not from a single throat, but from the tree itself, from the very air around him. Miller stumbled back, his boots slipping on the wet leaves. He never took his eyes off the tree. He didn't run. How? He just retreated. A deliberate, controlled movement born of pure terror. He made it back to his truck as total darkness fell, the shriek still echoing in his mind. The official report he filed was vague. It cited unidentified animal vocalizations and recommended the temporary closure of the Ridgeback Loop for wildlife observation. The trail was never officially reopened. Other rangers over the years would speak in hushed tones about hearing strange, imitative sounds from that section of the park. Ranger Miller put in for a transfer to an urban adjacent park a month later. He finished his career behind a desk. He never set foot on a deep woods trail again. Pearl. He was a man who knew the forest like the back of his hand. Bend, and he was driven from it forever by a sound he could not identify and a shape he could not forget. A story 2, The Man in the Glass House. Our second story comes from a rookie ranger named Chloe on her very first solo overnight shift. Her post was the Eagers Peak Fire Watchtower. Imagine a small cabin, made almost entirely of glass, perched on thin steel legs 100 feet in the air. It's a coveted assignment. It offers breathtaking solitude and view over 100 miles of untouched wilderness. By that, majestic beauty comes at a cost. Profound, crushing isolation. Prue, her only connection to the world below, was the radio. Hours after sunset, the world outside her glass walls became a sea of absolute perfect blackness. She was doing a routine scan with her binoculars when she saw it. A single point of light. It was like a lantern, moving slowly through a dense, restricted valley where no campers were allowed. It didn't bob up and down like a hiker's headlamp. It glided smoothly. She keyed her radio. Base. This is Eagle's Peak. I have a visual on a single light. Possible unauthorized campers in the North Valley. Her supervisor, a calm voice miles away, responded, "Copy that. Eagle's Peak. Probably just poachers. Log it. No one can get out there till morning." He paused, then added, "You're safe up there, Chloe. Just keep the door locked." As he finished speaking, the light in the valley blinked out. An hour passed in dead silence. Chloe tried to convince herself it was nothing. Just poachers, like he said. Then she heard a sound from directly below the tower. A faint, metallic scrape. Scrape. It was a sound she couldn't place. Then it was joined by another. A rhythmic thump, 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 coming up the 100-foot steel staircase that spiraled around the tower. Someone, or something, was climbing, being a pure flight response. She killed the interior lights, plunging the cabin into darkness. She crawled on her hands and knees to the heavy trapdoor in the floor that led to the catwalk outside. Her hands shaking, she peered through the small grate in the door. She saw him. A tall, skeletal man, dressed in what looked like filthy rags, was climbing the stairs. But he wasn't using his hands. He was climbing on all fours, like an insect, his long limbs moving with an unnatural fluidity, and his head was tilted all the way back, his face pointing directly up at her. A wire, predatory grin was stretched across it. Chloe scrambled away from the trapdoor, fumbling for her radio, her breath catching in her throat. Eagles, peak to base. Someone is on the tower. I need help now. Bye. She pressed herself into the far corner of the cabin, her eyes locked on the trapdoor, waiting for it to burst open. The thumping stopped. Silence. A full, agonizing minute passed. She held her breath. Did he leave? Did he fall? Tap, tap, tap. The sound came from the window right behind her. She turned her head slowly. Impossibly. The man was there. Outside the window. 100 feet in the air. He was clinging to the side of the glass cabin like a gecko, his filthy face inches from hers. He didn't try to break the glass. He didn't move. He just held her gaze with that same wide, hungry grin. Then he slowly raised a single, bony finger and drew a long, deliberate line down the pane of glass, leaving a greasy trail in its wake. Chloe screamed, a raw, animal sound she didn't recognize as her own. She collapsed under her console, babbling incoherently into the radio. The man remained at the window for what felt like an eternity, and then he let go. He fell back into the blackness. She never heard a sound of impact. She stayed huddled there, sobbing, until the first light of dawn broke over the mountain. A rescue team arrived by helicopter hours later. They found her in a state of shock, unable to form coherent sentences. They searched the area at the base of the tower exhaustively. They found no body. They found no tracks. Nothing. The only proof that Chloe hadn't lost her mind was a single greasy smudge mark on the window pane outside, exactly where she said he had drawn the line with his finger. Chloe was granted an indefinite leave of absence. The Eagle's Peak Tower was later decommissioned, with the Park Service citing prohibitive maintenance costs. The wilderness keeps its secret, bro, and sometimes those who stand guard at its edge are the ones who are reminded most forcefully that not all secrets want to be kept. B. The wilderness is a place of profound beauty, but also profound indifference. It operates on a scale of time and power that we can barely comprehend. The rangers who patrol these vast spaces know this better than anyone. They know that for every law of nature, they understand there is a mystery that defies it. Our next two stories come from rangers who found themselves face to face with that defiance, where the very ground beneath their feet became a threat, and where a silent, empty campsite held more terror than any beast. Story 3. The Cave That Breathes. Ranger Thompson was a man made of calm calculation, a 15-year veteran. He was the park's lead for search and rescue, and his specialty was cave systems. He was methodical, an expert. He was leading a small team on what should have been a straightforward mission. A young, overconfident caver had gone missing in the Black Moor Cave system. It was a place Thompson knew well. He'd been in it a dozen times. It was dangerous, yes, but it was a known quantity. He ran through the protocols with his team at the entrance. Check-in car, feeling the familiar, damp chill that poured from the cave's mouth. This was his office. He was in control. The team descended, their headlamps cutting sharp, white cones into the absolute blackness. They reached the grand chamber, a massive cavern deep inside the earth, and the point where the lost caver was last seen. They found his pack dropped carelessly on the ground. A water bottle lay a few feet away, but there was no sign of the man himself. As they paused to regroup, Thompson felt it first. A low, deep vibration through the thick soles of his boots. Then he heard it, a faint, rhythmic thrumming, seeming to come not from any one direction, but from the rock itself. One of the younger rangers, a kid named Samuels, looked at him, his eyes wide. What is that? Thompson hid his own unease. Seismic activity, he said, his voice reassuring. Or a deep underground river. Bit happens by. He knew, with a cold certainty growing in his gut, that there was no river in this part of the system. They pressed on, moving into a narrow passage. The thrumming sound grew louder, more defined. It was losing its mechanical quality. It was beginning to sound less like an engine, and more like a slow, deep heartbeat. Poof, or breathing. A sudden draft of air pushed past them. It was warm, and it carried a foul, organic smell, like a predator's den. This was impossible. The Black Moor was a dead-end system. The air should be still and cold. Thompson pulled out his compass. The needle wasn't pointing north. It was spinning wildly, uselessly. He pulled out his backup. The second needle did the same. They were now officially disoriented in a place where direction is life and death. The passages felt tighter than he remembered, closer. The breathing was no longer just a sound. It was a powerful, percussive force. He could feel in their chests with every beat. The rock around them groaned, a low, guttural sound of immense pressure. Then they saw it, and Thompson's professional calm finally shattered. The walls of the narrow passage ahead of them, they were visibly pulsing, contracting and expanding by several inches, with each rhythmic throom. Ahead in the darkness, they saw the lost caver's headlamp. Its beam was frantic, trapped, pinned under a recent rock fall that hadn't been there on their way in. Pass. They watched, paralyzed with horror. The beam of light was abruptly squeezed, distorted, and then it winked out. The passage ahead of them audibly ground itself shut with a sound of immense, final pressure. The cave wasn't a cave. It was a mechanism, a trap, a throat. Realizing they were seconds from being sealed in forever, Thompson screamed, the only order that mattered. Out now. The climax wasn't a fight. It was a panicked, desperate retreat, a scramble for their lives through a living, constricting tomb that was actively trying to digest them. Best out of the entrance, gasping for air, their lungs burning. Just as a huge section of the cave mouth collapsed behind them with a deafening roar, the official report blamed a highly unusual, localized seismic event for the cave-in and the tragic loss of the Kavar. The Blackmore cave system was permanently sealed with concrete and condemned, a scar of grey cement. On the mountainside, Thompson filed the report, but he knew what he felt. He never led another underground rescue. He was haunted for the rest of his career by the chilling, unshakable feeling that they weren't in a cave at all. They were in the gullet of something ancient, vast, and sleeping. And they had woken it up. Story 4. The Silent Campsite Ranger, Eva. Restover was known for her sharp eyes and a no-nonsense attitude that served her well in the backcountry. On this particular day, she was on a routine, almost annoying task. A welfare check. A solo camper, a man named Alistair Finch, had overstayed his backcountry permit by nearly a week. Pike. He was camped in a remote, non-designated spot, and it was Eva S.'s job to hike out and tell him to pack it up or move along. She expected to find what she usually did, a messy campsite and an uncooperative tourist. She was wrong. She arrived at the GPS coordinates of the campsite, and it was perfect. Impossibly, unervingly perfect. The tent was pitched with military precision, the lines taut and symmetrical. The unused firewood was stacked next to the fire pit in a flawless, geometric cube. The pit itself had been swept clean, with not a single stray ash out of place. There was no trash, no dropped gear, no sign of human mess. It looked like a pristine photograph from a camping gear catalog, not a site that had been lived in for nearly a month. But Alistair Finch was nowhere to be seen. The wrongness of the scene settled on her like a physical weight. Her initial annoyance was gone, replaced by a growing sense of dread. She began a careful investigation, and the details only got stranger. Inside the tent, his sleeping bag was neatly rolled up. His food supplies, however, were arranged in neat rows, as if on display. Outside, a single can of beans sat on the ground, open, with a spoon still resting inside. On a camp chair nearby, a book lay open to the middle of a chapter, its pages held down by a perfectly smooth gray rock. It was as if he had vanished instantaneously in the middle of two separate actions. Eva began to circle the camp. She found one set of boot prints, his leading away from the camp. There were no returning tracks. Then she saw them, clanging from the branches of the surrounding trees, with small, intricate sculpture. They were woven from twigs, pine needles, and what looked like animal sinew. They looked like some kind of primitive folk art, Poe or territorial marker. Eva cautiously followed the single set of footprints. They led away from the impossibly neat camp, through the trees, and directly toward the edge of a steep, rocky bluff that overlooked a rushing river far below. The prints were clear in the soft earth. They went right to the edge. And they stopped. There was no sign of a struggle. No scuff marks from a slip or a fall. No disturbed rocks. The footprints simply ended 2 feet from the precipice, as if he had walked to that exact spot and been lifted away. Ava stood there, bewildered, a cold knot of fear tightening in her stomach. She scanned the opposite bank, the sky, anywhere, nothing. That's when she heard it. It was a quiet, melodic sound from the woods behind her, back toward the camp. She turned slowly. By in the branches of a distant tree, she saw a flicker of movement. A new twig sculpture was being tied to a branch. The twigs and twine were moving, twisting together as if woven by an unseen hand. She wasn't alone. She was being watched, and whatever was watching was tidying up. Eva didn't run. She backed away slowly, her hand on her radio, her eyes locked on the trees. She called for backup, her voice steady but strained. The official investigation turned up nothing. Nobody ever recovered from the river below. Alistair Finch was declared a missing person, officially presumed to have accidentally fallen from the bluff, despite the complete lack of evidence. The strange twig sculptures were dismissed as the missing man's peculiar hobby. But Eva knows better. She is haunted not by a monster or a ghost, but by a chilling sense of order, by the silence, the neatness, and the terrifying implication of a patient, meticulous predator that doesn't just hunt, but curates the scene of its victim's disappearance.